Hi guys, it's Laura. Thanks for watching and welcome back to my channel. Today I will show you how to make a fairy house lantern of a mason jar and an air drying modeling clay. This is going to be a 3-part tutorial, otherwise the videos would be way too long, while this is already the longest part. And I find it easier to follow when divided into sections. So today we are going to focus on the main part of the fairy house. I tried to explain everything as detailed as possible so that also beginners could follow my instructions. So if you want to know how to make the main section of the fairy house, then please keep watching. Let's talk about the material that I will be using for today's project. So I will be using white air drying modeling clay. Now this one is by the brand Staedtler. It's called Fimo Air Basic, but it does not have to be necessarily this brand and this color. There are different brands and different colors. So for example, I have here an air drying modeling clay, which is pretty much the same thing. It's just a different brand and it's the color terracotta, but it would work just as fine. As long as it's an air drying modeling clay that's also suitable for sculpting, it will work. Now I'm gonna use the same one that I have used for my fairy house prototype, which you can see here in the back. It's already open, so I will just work with whatever I have left. There is also this type of air drying modeling clay by the brand Fimo. It's called Fimo Air Light. Now that's a material you would use whenever you would prefer your work being more lightweight. And another difference is that that can be also put into microwave for 10 minutes, which would speed up the drying process, or you can have it simply air dried. Now the modeling clay that we're gonna be using must dry on air. You should not put it in the oven, you should not put it in the microwave. That would damage your work. Even if you would put your work somewhere near furnace, it could happen that your work might get little cracks and get damaged. So make sure that when you're done with your piece, have it dried somewhere with a regular temperature and give it time, because depending on how thick the layers will be, it might need even several days. So keep that in mind. First, we need to start creating the base for the roof. So the way I did it for this lantern was I made a circle of cardboard and I glued it to the top of the mason jar, and then I basically put a cone on the top. So the only thing that goes over the edge is then the modeling clay. So that's why you can see the golden edge, the color of the lid. Now this time I want to cover this as well. So I'm gonna do it a little bit differently. So I have here a circle that I cut out of cardboard, and you can see that I cut out a third of it. And this is basically the same that I did for the first lantern. So first, I will kind of break the cardboard so that I can shape it better. So I kind of keep molding it with my fingers so that it's not so stiff. And now I should be able to form it into the roof shape. And this time we are going to glue it with hot glue to the edges of the mason jar's lid, so that it goes basically over like so, so you will not see the lid at all. I will cut it back though, and by the way, in order to have a perfect circle, I simply used one of our plates because it had almost the diameter that I wanted to have. So now I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, that's perfect. So I am going to glue this in place. I'll be very careful. Working with hot glue, you always have to be careful. So I'm gonna apply the hot glue on this area. And I will wait shortly because this is very hot. And when it cools off a little bit but still is soft, I'm going to close this and push it together very carefully. That's the reason why you have to wait a little bit until you start putting it in place because otherwise you would burn your fingers. This stuff gets really extremely hot. And I'm going to let it cool off completely before I'll continue. Now the hot glue cooled off sufficiently, so I'm gonna cut it back wherever needed so that I would have a nice edge. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect because you will cover it with the clay anyway, but it has to be still neat. Now I'm gonna turn the roof upside down and I'm going to put the lid in. I'm gonna grab a pen and I'm just gonna mark about where the edge of the lid is going to be. And this is where I'm going to apply again quite a lot of the hot glue. And now I will put the lid in place. What you have to consider is again the temperature of the hot glue. So I recommend pushing it in the middle and try not to touch the edges. Ideally you would have something like an oven mitt on your left hand just in case the glue would get very hot, and push it in place a little bit and hold it there until the glue hardens and the lid will stay in place. And now the glue is hot, so I can easily screw the lid with the roof on and off. I would recommend not screwing it too tightly because once you will have the modeling mess on it, that's gonna add some weight, and I'm not sure how resistant and how strong the hot glue would be long term. So just screw it on ever so slightly so that it stays close, and that should be enough. You can of course cut back the edges wherever necessary so that the length of the section that is longer that covers the lid is everywhere the same. I'm kind of eyeballing it, but you can of course measure it as well. That is entirely up to you. Alright, so our little roof is ready, or I should say the base for our roof. So I will put it to the side for now, and we're gonna grab the mason jar and we're gonna be working for now on the main construct of the fairy house. Now I covered my table with the silicone sheet that I usually use for baking. I have here the air drying clay. I have here a bowl with a little bit of water, which we will also need during the process. Our mason jar is in place, and I have here a couple of tools that are for sculpting. You don't necessarily need this. You could also use some simple kitchen tools and little knives like that, and the same brand that I have the modeling clay from also sells tools like this, so I'll be using these. But for example, instead of this one with the little like teeth, you could use simply a small fork. You can also use your fingers, so you don't necessarily need tools like that, but they are sometimes handy. The surface of the mason jar needs to be absolutely clean, so I washed it, and I also cleaned it with vodka, so my Russian ancestors would be so proud of me. And anyway, I'm gonna start working on this piece, so this is gonna be probably a little loud when I'm opening the package. So I will always grab only a really small piece of the modeling clay, and I will form it with my fingers and make it a little bit flatter. Then I dip my fingers slightly in the water and I will push it on the glass. And then I will continue sculpting it and pushing it in place. And when I will have a certain area covered and I will like the thickness of the layer, I will again dip my fingers into water and kind of go over it again and smoothen the surface as well as I can. And I will continue doing so until the complete glass will be covered. However, we have to keep in mind that we need to be able to screw on the roof, so I will go only about till here. You definitely want to start putting on it rather thinner layers and work your way from there. Because if you would put on too thick layers and you would not work them perfectly in place, later they might flake and fall off the surface. Now the entire glass is covered and I want to cut out a few windows and I want to have a door somewhere. So for that you can take any little knife or tool and you will start simply cutting the shape of the windows out directly on the glass. And then you would remove the clay that's inside. So now I have here these 3 windows. I took a piece of cloth and I'm just gonna lightly clean them. It doesn't have to be perfect. We will all clean properly later once the work will be dried and painted and completely finished, but I like cleaning it in between at least a little bit because it's then easier to clean it later. And when you cut out the windows like that, you can always reshape the shape of the windows a little bit with your fingers or with tools like that so that you have as clean edge as possible. So again, you don't necessarily have to have tools like that, but they do come handy when it comes to things like this. So I have here the remaining Fimo, the modeling clay. I will roll it out like so, and I will make a little parting in the window, but you have to keep in mind that the modeling clay will shrink a little bit and it needs to be sticking to something, so I will work it in the edges of the window. So I'm gonna overlap, otherwise that would just fall off. It happened to me when I made the prototype. I didn't consider that, so you can see I pushed it in, and I'm gonna take one of my tools and I'm gonna shape it. And I think I'm gonna use this one with the teeth and make the surface a little rough. Okay, yeah, that's okay. I want it to look a little bit like wood. So, and then I'm gonna wet my finger and work these ends in, because that way I made sure that it's not gonna fall off just like it did when I made my prototype. So I'm gonna do the same for the bottom window. So I'm gonna make a little ball. Okay, hold on. And then I'm gonna roll it like so into a wormy. I don't know what you would call it, but let's call it wormy. That's a great technical term, very professional. And then let's put it over this window like so. And again, I'm gonna push it in at the ends and push it to the glass also. Now I'm gonna grab this and make the surface look more like wood, a little bit rough. Maybe when it's wet, it's gonna be easier. There we go. Shape it a little bit again. Gonna do the same on the top one. Right. And now I'm gonna wet my finger and again work the end in here and on the bottom. And that's basically the principle of the basic shape of the windows. And don't be afraid to shape these as long as necessary until you reach the desired shape. Now I'm going to grab more of the modeling clay and I'm gonna make more wormies, and we're gonna use them around the little windows so that they have a nice frame. So I have here a longer wormy, so I'm just gonna make the surface wet here so that it can stick nicely. And I will push it in like so. Now I will make my finger wet again, and I will work it in. But this time I will not make it too flat because it still needs to stand out so that it's clearly the frame of the window. I'll grab one of my tools to help me with the edges. Here we go. And also here on the bottom. But you do need to push it a little bit in place so that it would connect with the modeling clay that's already on the glass, so that it wouldn't fall off later, which is again something that happened to me when I made the prototype. This is how you learn. Now you can learn, as always, from my mistakes. It's always the best to learn from mistakes from others. So now I'm pretty happy with how it's in place, so I'm gonna grab the one with the little teeth, and I'm just gonna go over it, shape it a little bit like wood. On this side too. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's a fairy house. And there we go, we made our first window frame. So we are on the opposite side. I think I'm just gonna make two bigger windows here. You can make the same grouping or bigger windows just like I'm doing. That's of course entirely up to you. Use your imagination, it's your work. And as always, there is no right and wrong. You have to like it, and that's the only person that matters. Well, or if it's a present, then the person you are giving it to should like it. But other than that, it really doesn't matter what other people think. Now I want to create a door on one side, so I have here this piece of the clay where I took a lid of a spraying bottle and I cut out this little hole. Then I kind of pushed in and made a little structure again with this tool, and you could do it with a fork. But since I want to have a hole in it like a window, I will do it this way. So I'm just gonna wet the surface at the place where I want to have the door, and I'm gonna wet the back of the door, and I'm gonna push it on like so, and I'm gonna shape it a little bit with my fingers, but I'll make sure that it really sticks nicely. So there we go. I'm also gonna create a frame when I'll be done. And I just realized that it did not really make much sense to make the structure because I still have to work it in place first. But at least I know what I will be doing. So now, once it will be pushed in place, I will take the same lid of the bottle that I used for the hole, and I will cut through like so. And turn it a little bit so that I separate the clay from the edges. And now I'm just gonna scrape it out, just like I did with the windows. And then I'm just gonna leave it like that for now. But then I'm gonna go over again and create this structure. There we go. And I'm gonna clean the edges here inside and get out all of the clay. Now I want to have door knockers, so I made a teeny tiny little thin wormy, and I shaped it into a ring, and I'm gonna put it in place on both sides like so. And now I'm gonna make two kind of a ball, like balls or something. That should be the handles for the knockers. but I'm gonna make it rather flatter. And again, the surface needs to be wet, and the ball needs to be wet too. And let's place it above it like so. Oh, my phone is very anxious to get my attention apparently. We're just gonna ignore it for now. And that will hopefully stay in place. Now I cut also with the spray bottle cap here a window out. I'm not gonna do anything special for the window, but it will have the same frame that the other windows have. But first I need to shape it properly, so it's gonna be nice and round. Now I turned the house and I'm gonna make a little round window about here. So I'm again gonna cut it out with the lid of the spray bottle. Alright, so here's our work so far. So we have 3 windows here. Here we have the door with the knockers and the round window above it, and these 2 big windows, and here in the back the little window. And that is enough with the windows. And now we're gonna start making another detail. So what I want is, I want to have on this side vines. So I'm gonna make very thin shapes of the modeling clay. I'm gonna always dip them into water, and I want them to come like so. And basically what I want is to have vines all the way up around this window between the side windows. So when you're going to make leaves, like I do, you really want to make sure that the surface is wet, and you really want to make sure that the leaf is also not dry. But when you put the leaves in place, you want to leave them on, no pun intended, for a few minutes before you start carving them out, because right now they need to stick. And you don't want to do it too fast, because if I would go in like so, then I might move the leaf unintentionally. So now we have our vines, and the next thing I want to have is around the bottom edge everywhere something that will look like stones. So I'm gonna make little shapes that will kind of look like stones. They don't have to be all equal, they don't have to have the same sizes. So for that I will always grab a small piece of the modeling clay and I will shape it with my fingers into something that looks like this. I will wet the surface where I want to have the stone, and then I will dip the stone shortly in water, and then I will push it in place where I want to have it. And I will make sure that it's really nicely pushed in place. Then I'm gonna smoothen the surface with my wet finger. For that you sometimes need to lift your work. And yeah, I will make smaller stones and bigger stones, whatever's gonna look good to me. Important is that you will make sure that they will stick in place. just finished. I also cleaned the top a little bit. So here we have the stones on the bottom. I placed few stones in the place where we have our plant. And instead of that, I made few more of the stones and placed them here on the top. And now the piece has to dry, so I will let it dry for about 2, probably even 3 days, just to be sure. Alright, so this is how I made the main section of the fairy house. If you have any further questions, simply write them down below in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can and answer all your questions to the best of my ability. There will be 2 additional videos. In the next video, I will show you how to make the roof, and in the final video, I will cover the painting, so stay tuned for that. And if you're watching this tutorial sometimes in future, these videos might be already up, so I will link them down below. And that is it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I love you guys so much and see you soon. Bye.